Good evening, Gwynúis le Galéir. I've taken a small bit of liberty with the topic. I think the topic of infrastructure is key. It's certainly key, but it's not the only thing. The second thing, will it be implemented? Well, look, I think I more or less want to focus on here what will be important for it to be implemented and what will be important, particularly from the local government sector. And I know I'm at the other end of the country, but I'm sorry, you're going to have to listen tonight a lot about Kerry. So bear with me on that one. I just put the map up here. Owen had a map there that just distinguished in green at the time what was the southern region. A lot of what I talk about is Kerry, which is the area with the pink coming out of it, nothing to do with gender, and the area across there just connects from Waterford right across to Limerick. So that's really the area that I'm talking about. And I suppose the first thing I'd say is that from the very, very first initial submission that I saw in Kerry from the Academy of Engineers Ireland, I knew this was something we had to sit up and look at. I think the idea of a counterbalance to Dublin, and contrary maybe to what Owen's thoughts are, very, very welcome from sitting down there in the southwest corner of Ireland. I think the second thing, the idea of strong regional cities driving growth as a real counterbalance, and they working together in a unified way is something that actually did appeal to Kerry from a Kerry perspective. But I think in the interest of telling the truth here tonight as well, if you were me and you see those lines of the metropolitan growth, so you see the line going from Waterford across to Cork up to Limerick and on to Galway, you'd be a small bit worried as well, and to say, okay, well, where is the future for Kerry in this? And sitting down in the southwest corner, I think we took a view very early on that we had to strategically place the county, and we had to take a view so that it would allow us to engage not only with the national planning framework process itself, but also with the regional process, which Carol mentioned, and engaging with that in a meaningful way. Two things came out of our assessment. Number one, do you see the red bits on the map there? I know that's not a very planning way of referring to it, but the red dots there, they show the urban centres, and it also shows the commuter. The red bits are the commuter bits around it, and the yellow, they're the areas of influence. And the one thing you'll see, and I think it surprised us when we looked at this in Kerry through our local economic and community planning process, was the actual very self-containment of Kerry and the very weak influence of both Cork and Limerick on the development of the county. So I suppose from the national planning framework, therefore, it's hugely important that the linkage to Limerick and Cork gets stronger from a Kerry perspective. The second thing I'll talk from a Kerry perspective is that, I take Owen's point that, any town over 10,000 population, in its own right may not stand in the context of the national planning framework. So what we identified in the county, and you'll see a tiny little triangle, I can't even see without my glasses myself, the blue triangle there. I call it the engine. It's the economic engine of the county. The planners in my organisation, they call it knowledge triangles because I think they like the terminology, but in an act of a small bit of rebellion tonight, I'll call it the economic engine of the county. The economic engine of the county covers the national tourism town that is Killarney, and if you don't believe me, it's a national tourism driver. It had 1.56 million bed nights alone last year. It takes in, within that there will be soon to be university. The Institute of Technology is soon to be the Munster Technological University aligned to Cork, the CIT in Cork. Within that we also have the town of Tralee, which is a 25,000 population centre. That is really an area that is growing and is getting stronger. Within that, we've seen a 40 million regeneration of recent times. We've seen a public realm upgrade within the town centre itself. There's a lot of economic regeneration going on within the heart of the centre of Tralee. And really, it is an area where we have a Kerry Technology Park. We have a lot of enterprise and a lot of global enterprise within that base. We also, peculiarly enough, we also have a very rural town as part of our economic triangle. That economic, which is Kirkland, and I'll talk about Kirkland later on. You have in there FESCO, which is a global joint, an indigenous industry that has grown to global proportions in the Kirkland area, and we also have a very strong med tech centre there. Kirkland in its own right bucks the trend of most rural towns insofar as for every person working there, living there, you have two people working there. So that's very, very unusual for a rural town. So within that knowledge triangle, we have 50% over 50% of the population of the county. And in the last census, over 85% of the growth of the county was within that knowledge triangle. So from the Kerry position, we're saying that knowledge triangle must connect from a Kerry perspective into the metropolitan growth areas. We accept we're part of a very strong region. We accept the metropolitan areas can grow. They can perform a counterbalance to Dublin, but Kerry must also connect into that, and this knowledge triangle can drive the economy of that very strong region as opposed to detract from it. We're also saying in that context it would be very important that the national planning framework and the regional discussions that will happen hereafter support population growth as well within that, and we estimate there would be capacity in and around a 40% growth within that knowledge triangle. So I suppose my point here tonight is that that knowledge triangle will require a national designation. So I think it's fair tonight when I talk about, the national planning framework, what would I define as success from the national planning framework? Carol referred to the distinction of having the oldest population with Mayo, and that's very true. In the last census population, we grew by 0.5% in population, and that's fine. But what it did do as well is that it cloaked an awful lot of rural depopulation across the county, both in the northern part of the county and the southern part of the county. And they may actually, as I'll refer later in the tourism piece, may actually surprise you. So what success of the national planning framework would look like for me is an increase in our population base. It would be our ability to retain graduates. We have a very high proportion and above the national average of students going to third level in the county, but we have one of the lowest retention rates of graduates coming back to live and work in the county. Also, another very basic measurement that I would look at is the actual number of children attending national schools. And I'm sure if you look here in parts of Donegal and you look right along the western coast, down to parts of Kerry, we have 1 in 2 children starting national school in areas that have suffered such acute depopulation at this stage. So that's what success looks like for me, because when you have a county with one of the highest dependency ratios, that they're the kind of metrics for success that you have to focus in on. So I've talked about a strong region. Well, a strong southern region for me is the region. If you take the southern region here, we have 3 of the 5 metropolitan growth areas, or 3 of the 4 if you exclude Dublin, which of course I don't want to do. But if you take the Limerick, the Cork and Waterford, we have 3 of the national growth centres. So it is a very, very strong region. But for a region to be strong, it has to be a cohesive region, and that will be difficult to achieve, I feel, in the context of the national planning framework and its success. It'll have to market itself as a region. We'll have to create an idea, an identity. We'll have to have joined up areas of growth. We'll have to have clusters. We'll have to have regional clusters. We'll have to have common centres of excellence. So in other words, what defines that region? At the moment, is Waterford to Kerry, do we have a shared identity? We don't. But the cohesive region, if we're really to become a cohesive region, what are our strengths as a region? Is it agriculture? Is it agri-tech? Are we very strong on the tourism piece? What are our strengths? We'll have to start identifying ourselves as cohesive entities to provide a real counterbalance. To provide a real counterbalance to the eastern corridor alone, it cannot be just about the growth of the metropolitan areas alone. If those regional cities grow in their own right, does that constitute a counterbalance to Dublin? I don't think it does, and in that sense I would agree with Owen, even though I didn't agree with some other points, perhaps, as you'd expect I might not. So for that, if those cities grow in their own right, well then it may lead to what Owen referred to as unsustainable, the effects of unsustainable city growth or metropolitan growth. So in my context, from a Kerry perspective, there's a risk of creating variance within the region if we just focus on metropolitan growth in its own right. And I think it is hugely, hugely important, and part of our submission, that those towns of 10,000 population who are not part of commuter towns are treated with respect and are treated with the individuality with which they are. In other words, if you're a commuter town where people commute in and out to work, It's very different to being a town like Tralee or a town like Letterkenny. You know, it's a very different town. You're a functional town, you're a servicing town in your own right. And I think the National Planning Framework, it's very important as part of its implementation that it recognises that. A second thing I would say is obviously very important from my perspective, and I was interested to hear Owen's take on it, is the whole area of mobility and linkage and connectivity. And obviously you'll see, as I mentioned previously, from the Kerry perspective, road connectivity is going to be very important for us to become more linked to Limerick, to Cork, right across the region. Interconnectivity is going to be vitally important. The road network, for example. So it's very important that, you know, when I meet the industry champions and leaders in the county, they will say to me, well, why don't we have a motorway coming to Kerry? You know, I talk about the National Planning Framework. It's talking about a bypass that will link us quicker to Limerick, a bypass that will link us quicker to Cork. They will say, okay, well, we're looking at an M20, which is also very important for us, that links Cork to Limerick. Why can't we have a motorway? And I think there are possibly some of the discussions we need to start having as part of the National Planning Framework. But I think one of the strengths of a strong southern region, it's the ability of metropolitan areas to drive international and intra-regional connectivity. And that's something that's hugely important to Kerry. When you take our tourism industry, where 1 in 5 is employed in the county, when you take that we have a number of indigenously grown multinationals in the county, oddly enough. They've grown up in Kerry, they've thrived in Kerry, and they've become global, they've become multinational from Kerry. It's hugely important to them that this region delivers intra-connectivity and international connectivity. I think also we need to have the discussion in this around rail connectivity. I think light rail connectivity is hugely important, and I think recently the Chinese ambassador was in Kerry, and he talked about the link from Beijing to Balmullet and how they're looking at this rail system for freight movement. You know, I'm looking at Kerry and I'm thinking it's a 4-hour journey to Dublin. And I think, you know, that can be, you know, accessibility, that the carriage of freight, that the carriage of people, the investment in our rail network, I think that's something that we really, as a country, would benefit hugely from. When you see the plans to link Birmingham to London in about an hour and a half, I think these things are real and they're achievable. I want to talk a little bit about air access, because air access, from my perspective, I think maybe it's an example how I can show you how this is about infrastructure, but it's about a lot more than infrastructure, and it's about a strong region. And I'm also mindful, I thought tonight I could talk about this quite easily, but then I realised one of the co-directors of Kerry Airport is sitting in the audience, which makes me, I don't know if he liked what I have to say. But if you look at the airport structure, you have an airport, a very important airport in Shannon, which is also a hub for US FDI, very important for our region. Kerry Airport, which again, hugely important in our context and vitally important for businesses to grow and thrive in the county of Kerry. We have Cork Airport and we have Waterford Airport. So in the context of the National Planning Framework and in the National Development Plan, there are commitments there to grow airports. And yes, of course, it's wonderful to grow Shannon. And the tourists that come into Shannon come to Kerry. So, you know, that's fine with me. The plans to grow Kerry, that's very, very important. And it's very important because that's what the business leaders in Kerry tell me. We need a bigger and a stronger airport. The same with Cork and the same with Waterford. And if we all develop individually and we all invest in our own infrastructure, you know, that's fine. But then, is that a case where we're all chasing the same flights? So wouldn't it be a lot better thing for us to work strategically, the airports to work strategically, to say, okay, if we need a connector to Amsterdam, as I'm being told is constantly needed, you know, is it okay to have two airports in this region connecting to Amsterdam, which is an international hub? You know, are we all chasing the same things, or do we not need to be more cohesive, getting back to a more cohesive region, a more strategic region, a more joined up region, and say this is what we're going after? That will also have implications for local government. It will have implications. It's very easy for Kerry County Council to support Kerry Airport. It's a lot more difficult for Kerry County Council to support the airport of Shannon, Cork or Waterford. And they will be the challenges as we implement the National Planning Framework. I think they're the type of psychological hurdles we need to get over. I need to talk tonight, now I'm aware of time, but there are two areas I want to talk about tonight, and one is giving a lifeline to our rural towns and villages. When I talked about the knowledge triangle in Kerry and the economic driver that lies within that, I'm also conscious that just under half the population of the county don't live anywhere near the knowledge triangle. And I think at a very basic level, the greatest contributor to social exclusion is actually a bad road linkage. And where you don't have investment in your local roads and your secondary roads and your regional roads, and I know I'm talking about roads and maybe this is very basic, but it's critical to connect communities. Those communities need connection to that economic engine. They need connection to their market towns. And when we have rural areas, like the areas we're in tonight, and where you don't have that physical connectivity to them at the most basic road level, well then that is a disadvantage. I say the same with broadband, and people talk about rural broadband, and we talk about rural broadband as if it will come and it will transform. And I'm not saying that, because we have to work hard. Broadband comes, but then what? What are our plans? What are our ambitions after that? But the one thing I do know is that those communities and those rural areas, and I have a vast area in Kerry that yet we don't have rural broadband, and they are at a distinct advantage. So yes, to revitalise our rural towns and villages, it is rural electrification, it's broadband, it's absolutely critical. A second thing in the rejuvenation of our towns and villages, and I'm not here tonight to tell you, God, we're great in Kerry, because there's plenty of people in Kerry will tell you we're not. But I suppose some of the things we do well. But one of the areas, and I think it was one of the better decisions we had, was when the first round of rural funding became available under the Town and Village Scheme there about 3 years ago. We made a strategic decision as Kerry County Council that the first tranche of funding over the 2 to 3 year period would be put into economic infrastructure in the county. Remember now, these grants are in and around €100,000, so it's not big economic infrastructure. And we put infrastructure in place around innovation hubs. And this is something, I'm not saying it's a silver bullet, but it is something that has helped right across the rural economies. And we have examples in Kerry of innovation hubs that were driven by communities, with the buy-in of local government, in some places with the buy-in of Údarás, where it was within their jurisdiction, and working with Enterprise Ireland. And we now have a few very good examples in the county of how these hubs in communities can bring people with the wherewith to get together and start rejuvenating their areas. And if you don't believe me, I'd suggest you go back and you Google the Dingle Innovation Hub. It's a fantastic example of bringing innovators, technology together, bringing community together, and now it's a big part of Dingle's drive to create a world leader, because Dingle always thinks as world leaders in a low carbon economy. So I see Sive over there, I'm going to nap her later on that one. So these are the kind of things that bringing people together in innovation centres with good quality broadband, with good people. These are the kind of innovations that can help rural areas. Next one, and I need to talk about tourism. I haven't mentioned football, but I will mention tourism. Coming from the county, I do. Kerry has a huge dependence on tourism. For every person resident in the county, we have a population of 147,000 people. We have in the order of 13 to 14 visitors. We have about 2 million visitors passing through the county in any given year. And that dependence is great, and I'm not here to say it's terrible. Our dependence on tourism is absolutely really, really important. And it's very important that the national planning framework, any of the plans, see the tourism industry as an important industry as any other industry in this country. And that's a message I really want to get out strongly here today. But secondly, one of the things I will say, when you're looking at the revitalisation of towns and villages, it would surprise you that a number of the towns and villages that are on such world-renowned places such as the Ring of Kerry or the Dingle Peninsula, a number of those are hollowed-out areas which have faced huge rural decline. So, so when we talk about tourism, and sometimes, I hear people say, we need to develop tourism north to Galway. Of course you do, and that's hugely important. But very importantly, if you take Kerry, 75% of our tourists come within 4.5 months of the year. And I'm not here to give the bail buck on tourism. We are doing very well at the moment. But having said that, it's not sustaining populations. It's not retaining graduates. We need something more. We need an extension of the tourism season. How do you do that? That's not easy. We've looked at business tourism. Only 10% of the people who come to Kerry come for business tourism. That's an area we can grow. That's off-season, that's shoulder season, that's the kind of tourism we're looking at. Of course, at a time of Brexit, we're looking to mainland Europe. The risk there, the numbers of UK visitors are down. That is a real risk that we're carrying with Brexit. And so we do need to look to mainland Europe, and we do need to look wider afield. But getting back to the National Planning Framework and its support for tourism, I think the Wild Atlantic Way, a fantastic initiative, and I'm really, really supportive of it. And, in that thinking, and it's a bit like the cohesive regions, when you look along the Wild Atlantic Way, it's as important that the tourist has a good experience here in Donegal than they do in Kerry, because if they have an awful experience along the Wild Atlantic Way, well, we're all impacted. And I suppose at another level as well, and I think this is a very important point to make in the context of the National Planning Framework and its implementation. Yes, we do need, good greenway strategies and good connected greenway delivery. We need coastal walks deliveries. We need all of that. We need tourist plans. There is a lot of tourism planning going on at the moment, and that's all really good stuff. But as I speak, and as we're talking about extending up to Donegal our tourism, and having a stronger tourism, or when we're talking about off-peak in Kerry, there's a few basics we also have to get right there. We have a number of unsured villages. That has to be rectified. We have a lot of investment needed into our road network along the Wild Atlantic Way, parking, public conveniences, places for people to stay. Do we have adequate accommodation, hotels, particularly as you move north of Galway? I have places in Kerry, and you will probably have heard it on the media over the last year, in the Dingle Peninsula. We don't have accommodation for staff there, such as the pressure at particular times of the year. And so I know as a local authority, we have spent millions, even in this last year, in providing basic infrastructure. There needs to be funding models for that. It's fine to talk about local government and its ability to fund, but we need funding models. And I know the recent funding model that's there, the Urban Regeneration Fund and the Rural Regeneration Fund, I must say, I know there are people who would say it's not strategic, you're chasing the funding, that it really is only a drop in the ocean to what's needed. I think it's a very important piece of funding, because I think for the last 10 years, I can talk for local government, we have a lot of plans, a lot of regeneration plans waiting to be funded, to be given effect to. And I think this tranche of funding, it's very important to let us do that. I think hereafter, yes, it should be more strategic and it should be more aligned. And, I think that should take its course. Very briefly, and I'm aware, Carol, I've gone quite a good bit over time. You'll be glad to know I'm nearly there. The last thing I talked about there was the creation of centres of excellence of national and international standard. And I must say for the southern region, I think that's really, really important that we do that. And I want to take the action plan for jobs and its implementation recently, because I think when we talk about implementation of the National Planning Framework and how it's going to work at a regional level, I think there's some really good examples from the action plans for jobs. In our case, it was the Southwest Regional Action Plan for Jobs, and we actually spoke to the two Corks for first time in a long time and a long time since in that process. And it was a really, really positive process for us. And as a group of counties, we came together. It included industry, it included third level, and it was the first time we probably all got into a room, more than once and went away about our business, that we came together on a number of occasions and we developed plans together for our region. And what emerged from that is that in the Kerry-Cork situation, we identified ourselves as having particular strengths in fintech, in tourism, and in agri-tech. And we said, what we go for after this, when we're looking for projects after this, these are the areas we're going to work in. And when the funding stream came on board through Enterprise Ireland, we actually delivered within the county of Kerry. Again, it was within the county as opposed to the region, and I must accept that. We delivered two very transformative projects. One is an Fdi Innovation Hub in Kirkland, that town I spoke about earlier. That was led by FESCO, supported by Kerry County Council and supported by the Institute of Technology in Tralee. That will deliver in the next 5 years, it is under construction as I speak, 350 high-end technology jobs. That is huge in a Kerry context. And that's not me saying it. That's being driven by private industry, indigenous private industry, and a multinational within Kerry. The second area we looked at was a centre of excellence for agri-tech in the county. That is being delivered, as I speak, within the Institute of Technology in Tralee. That was driven by Dairymaster, one of our really, really strong smart agri companies in Kerry, but aligned the other agri industries right across the regions, including into Waterford. That will deliver a number of high-end technology jobs, and that's looking at the next generation artificial intelligence and a whole lot of stuff that I really, really don't understand, but I have to nod my head every now and again in meetings. So when you think of those things, they're rural projects that transform your rural area. What was different about that? And I think it's something Carol referred to. I think it brought us all up from outside our walls. It brought universities to talk to universities, third levels to third levels, councils to councils, and businesses. It was the first time that somebody told me, not only is it okay for me to go into collaboration with business, because as a public body, you're always that bit careful on governance, but it was saying, we expect you to do it, and we expect you to work with them, and we expect you to deliver jobs for your region. And I suppose just the end of that, I will say that from a Kerry perspective, the property tax in Kerry was risen by 5% this year to support that project. It raised 650,000, which was our investment into these two projects, and that was supported by the people of Kerry. And I think that's hugely important, as a basis. And I think they're the kind of workings and they're the kind of thinking, and that's the kind of new roles of local government that Carol talked about as well, that is required, and that kind of thinking when we're looking at delivering the National Planning Framework. So the National Planning Framework, it is about infrastructure. It is hugely about infrastructure, but it's not just about infrastructure. I think we can invest in infrastructure and very little will change. I think local government, we have a huge role to play in leading this out. I think we need to show leadership. The elected membership needs to show democratic leadership. And I think the new role given us under the 2014 Local Government Act puts us in a better place than it would have if that wasn't in place. We need new partnerships to be developed across the region. That will not be easy, and I can see problems in that. And I think also the funding streams need to be made available. And I think that is really, really important, and that the funding streams are flexible and they can allow people to be innovative. And I think that's hugely important. So look, thank you very much for listening tonight. So thank you very much.